Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is May 28th, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So last weekend was very interesting because there was some Russian-led incursions within Russia. So Russian citizens, part of the Russian Freedom Legion, did a raid within the Belgorod Oblast, which was quite successful. And as indicated in this article, they went as deep as 42 kilometers in Belgorod. Now, if you guys remember, about 2 months ago, I think there was a similar type of raid conducted by the same group. And they, I think, tested just the waters to see how good the Russian defenses were. And they managed to push about 10 kilometers. They claimed control over some settlements within Belgrade, and they quickly pulled out as soon as the Russians, came to regain those lost settlements. But now they went as deep as 42 kilometers, meaning that the Russians virtually left their borders still undefended ever since that small incursion a few months ago, showing that the Kremlin is poorly defended, right? The Russia's is completely undefended, and we're talking about the oblasts that are right beside Ukraine, right? You would think that at least they will learn from that previous situation. It would strengthen their borders with Ukraine, but no. And the Russian Freedom Legion said that they literally went through the border and it was virtual undefended. There was nobody there. And that's what allowed them to be able to push so far within the oblast and take over a lot of settlements, capture some vehicles. They also killed, allegedly, some security officers and destroyed about 10 armored vehicles, allegedly. And there's a few positive things that come out of this event that happened last weekend. So they stayed there for about a day or two, right before the Russians came back to regain the territory. First of all, the Russians again are definitely going to have to station more soldiers at the border, meaning there's going to be less Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine. And you can bet that these soldiers are going to be feeling lucky that they're defending Belgorod and not fighting in Ukraine. That's for sure. And also just due to the fact that their response was pretty terrible, the Russian response, right? The information sphere from Russia's side was very chaotic. There was no clear answer as to what was going on there. And the public was panicking, right? You had people fleeing the Belgrade Oblast. They thought that was it, and they're about to lose everything, that the Ukrainians are coming, right? And so the narrative was really, there was none at a certain point. There was none until they had to start pumping some cheap propaganda that they did a successful counteroffensive there, and they destroyed some Ukrainian Humvees. There's actually a picture that they posted of like two allegedly Ukrainian Humvees that were destroyed, but there was a breakdown of that picture, that it was actually a staged picture by the Russians. They just put two Humvees, shot them, and made it look like it was actually destroyed during combat. And also another video of General Lapin commanding his soldiers somewhere in Belgorod, right? And there was just like a small little BMP in the background and them running with AK-47s or whatever, AK-74s, about 5 or 6 of them, like it was very cheap propaganda they had to pull out. And, maybe the Russians bought it, but it's clearly not giving them any, it's not making anybody confident in Russia, that's for sure. So this is one of the good key takeaways, is that the Russians are definitely going to have to start stationing a lot more soldiers at the borders with Ukraine, because they're feeling uneasy and they don't know when the next raid is going to happen. Psychologically, it's also bringing the war to Russia closer. I think that the urban setters are still very detached from this war. Both news, like last weekend, there was no choice but to talk about it because it was on Telegram, on all the different Russian channels, and the Russian Ministry of Defense and the government had to answer somehow. And so this is again bringing this uneasiness, this war to the Russians. They're being lied to, being told that everything is going according to plan. It's still a special military operation. We still have, I don't know, 1,500 dead soldiers. But how come then we're getting raids in Belgorod from the Freedom Legion? right? So it's bringing the war closer, and people are starting to understand that this is not just some special military operation anymore. And two more things as well. Some good key takeaways from this is that obviously it's going to start giving more inspiration to other groups, other militias, to conduct their own raids or even claiming independence. And I'm looking at the Russian Caucasus, which is one of the hottest points where I think an independence movement could start. In the 90s, Chechnya, Dagestan, they were fighting very hard to get their independence, but they were brutally pressed during that war with Russia. But I think that now is their chance as the Russian regime is weakening. Kadyrov is also losing its influence. He's also sick as of late. So I think now is the chance for a lot of these groups to start doing their own raids and attacks against the Russian regime. And the last thing is, Ukraine is also always being told by the West that they cannot and should not attack Russia directly. There's always conditions being given to Ukraine when they receive weapons, such as the Storm Shadows or even the HIMARS systems, that you cannot hit Russia with these weapons. Well, now this gives an avenue to the Ukrainian army, right? They can just arm these Russian legions, right? Because it was carried out exclusively by Russian citizens. So you just need to arm them, give them the weapons, and they're going to do the rest, right? They're going to start destabilizing the territories within Russia, and that's all you need to do. So this gives a good alternative to Ukraine to continue destabilizing Russia and its military infrastructure. So I think that's really good as well, without having the Ukrainians commit to attacking Russia themselves. Now, the other news I want to discuss is Lukashenko. I think all of us have been aware that he's not been looking very healthy as of late, and we all started noticing that as when the May 9th parade happened, and he was there, and he barely stayed there until the end of the parade, and he left very quickly. He had a bandage on his hand, and he looked very ill. And so since then, he's kind of disappeared. He only made a few appearances, but he's not been looking healthy at all. And so now there's information that leads to believe that Lukashenko was poisoned. And guess who poisoned him? It's clearly the Kremlin and Putin. And that some specialists were sent to him, some doctors, because his situation was deemed as critical, and they needed to purify his blood. Well, clearly he was poisoned, and it's typical Kremlin tradition to poison people that they no longer find useful. And so clearly, I think that Lukashenko now falls into that category. I think I made a video about it many months ago. When I started making my videos actually on YouTube about, Belarus. And last year in the springtime, everybody was talking about, is Belarus going to enter this war? Are they going to start attacking Ukraine from the north and going to Kyiv, right? And that was a very likely scenario. And I gave it about 50-50, right? Thinking that perhaps Lukashenko would go all in and actually go with Putin. But you can see that for the past year, he has done nothing. He's been trying to find excuses to tell Putin that he can't attack and blah, blah, blah. And I think that this is angering Putin, and he no longer finds him useful, to be honest, right? If you're not useful to Putin, he's going to get rid of you. And so obviously why Lukashenko doesn't want to attack Ukraine is very clear. Well, now a year has passed. You can bet that the Ukrainian defenses in the north have been solidified. Again, it's uninhabited terrain, mostly due to the Chernobyl accident in 1986. And so parts of the region is uninhabited, large forests, swamps, and there's only few roads that lead to urban centers. So if the Belarusian army was to attack, they would need to follow just certain routes that the Ukrainians know they're going to take, which have been mined and are heavily defended. So it would be suicidal at this point for any army, whether it be the Belarusian army or the Russian army, to attack from the north. Extremely suicidal. But Putin doesn't care, right? He still wants Lukashenko to commit to it, because if he doesn't commit, that means that he's not aligned with Putin, right? So that's giving him a message that, well, Lukashenko doesn't care about the relationship that he has with Putin. So the second thing as well, why Lukashenko doesn't want to do this, is because he has been talking allegedly with Ukrainian intelligence and also Western intelligence for an off-ramp, right? He doesn't want to be under Putin's rule anymore, right? He doesn't want to be under the Russian influence. He wants to control his country his own way. He still wants to remain as a dictator, as the president of Belarus, but he doesn't want to be under the Russian influence. He sees that this has too much negative impact, and that possibly he could lose Belarus once he dies, which is very possible now. And so it's also a way for him, if he was, let's say, to be deposed, or the Russian regime collapses, and thus, because he heavily depends on the Russian regime for security, that he might also be deposed. Anyways, he might be brought to the court, and then that's his off-ramp to say, well, look, I had my back pushed against the wall. I was forced by Putin, and you can see I didn't attack Ukraine. I tried to do my best to avoid this, right? He can still have that off ramp. But if he attacks, well, that's it. It's gone, right? He's going to be in the same category as Putin, and he's going to be tried, the same like Putin in The Hague, right? If it comes down to that point. So I think that's some of the main reasons why Lukashenko has tried to avoid being directly involved into this war ever since it started. So the other thing I wanted to talk about as well is that it seems to be heading in that direction, that his days are likely numbered at this point, and that Putin will most likely get rid of him. So what's going to happen to Belarus after? Right, because it's going to create a massive power vacuum, right? Lukashenko's been the leader of Belarus ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, pretty much. And he's been there for over 30 years at this point. It's going to create a massive power vacuum. And so I'm really worried as to what's going to happen to Belarus. And most likely it's going to be a civil war, or close to that, a massive tug of war between Putin and Russian loyalists, that are aligned with Lukashenko. And then on the other side, you have the pro-Western people that are going to be fighting to get control over the government and turn Belarus hopefully into a democratic country. I can hope that it's going to be smooth and that the Belarus people are going to take over easily, but I seriously doubt that. Putin is not going to back down without a fight. For him, Belarus, if Lukashenko dies, it's going to be an easy annexation, right? Because he has infiltrated the Belarus government and its institutions so easily, right? That's how Lukashenko knows he's feeling uneasy, because he doesn't trust anyone, right? Everybody's from the Russian FSB to the GRU have infiltrated Belarus super easily, right? Deposing him wouldn't be an issue, in my opinion. It wouldn't be that difficult. And so there might be a massive civil war happening once Lukashenko dies. It could be a likely scenario. And so, unfortunately, I think that if that happens, it's going to be bloody. It's going to be bloody, because we've seen that in 2020, when the rigged fake elections happened in Belarus, there was millions of people that came out to protest against it. And you already see the numbers, right? You have probably the same amount of people in Belarus that are very loyal to the Russian regime and just being aligned with Russia. And you have also a similar percentage of people that are also, they want to be aligned with the West, right? So it's going to be another sort of tug of war like it happened in Ukraine, as to who takes control over the government, right? And this time, it's not going to be just, a revolution. It's going to be a battle, a war. So I hope it's going to be peaceful, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be heading that direction. Now, speaking of the north in Kyiv, today is Kyiv Day, so huge day. Kyiv is and will be under Ukrainian control. It's a Ukrainian city, and so the people are celebrating the day. Kyiv, one of the most important European cities, and unfortunately, the Russians always like to spoil the festivities, and so today they did one of the largest drone attacks ever. They sent about 55 or 56 Shahed drones, mainly targeting Kyiv. And thankfully, the Ukrainian air defense did its job. The heroes that are fighting every day to protect the Ukrainian skies shut down 52 of them. So that's, reason, gives far more reason, for Ukraine to keep receiving air defense systems, and thankfully the West has been providing that. And the Ukrainians have shown a willingness and the capability of learning these new systems, and that's what we were asking for, right? It's just having the skies protected. And one thing that I also wanted to point out is a very important quote from Marcus Aurelius from his Meditations notes. And he said that the noblest kind of retribution is not to become like your enemy, right? Russia's doing this because they want Ukraine to do the same. And then they can start pointing fingers at the Ukrainians that, look, they're no different than us, right? They're attacking our civilian infrastructure, they're attacking our people, blah, 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 right? And that gives them more reason to continue doing these attacks and provides them more reason for the Russian people to attack civilian infrastructure, maternity wards, schools, right? So Ukraine cannot allow itself to become like Russia. And I think that they've been doing a very good job at refraining from attacking civilian infrastructure. You guys have seen it all, what Russia's been doing, right? Even recently, Dnipro, I think they attacked a maternity ward. Just disgusting behavior, right? Everything is targeted at making life miserable for the civilian population in Ukraine, right? That's what Russia wants to do. And the Russian population, unfortunately, has been rejoicing. You just need to go on their pro-Russian Telegram channels to see what type of perspective and opinions these people have. They're rejoicing about all these attacks that are happening in Ukraine. They're thinking that it's great. So Ukraine can allow themselves to become like that because we wouldn't be any different from the Russian people. This is what differentiates Ukraine from Russia. And we need to continue on this trajectory of being just normal humans that stand behind morality and kindness and good. And last thing is, what is being discussed again in the Russian state TV channels, and there's more and more and more uneasiness going on. So you can see now, as the Russian election is going to happen, I think next year, we all know who's going to be the winner if Putin survives. We're still lives by that time. Clearly, it's going to be Putin, but they still pretend that they have elections there. Anyways, so one of the guests is now questioning whether they should continue having Putin as the leader, the current government, right? And so there's a lot of uneasiness. The TV anchor quickly tries to shut down this guest, and they quickly switch topics right after he's mentioned that if we want to be more aligned with the West and Europe, we can't continue with the current trajectory. We need to end things. We need to switch governments. And there's a lot of uneasiness going on, telling this guest that he's being an agitator and he's going to force, he's creating an agitating sort of narrative. So I'm going to do the voiceover. Under the current political regime, there is no way for us to come back to Europe, says Boris, this guy. We simply have to choose different authorities to govern the country that would stop the story with Ukraine. Build a relationship with European countries and everything will come back to place. And then the TV anchor says, what for, Boris? You're predictable. I was expecting for you to say this all, word by word, 100%. It's boring. Next year, we have presidential election. We need to choose somebody else and not Putin. Everything will be good then. I am afraid, Boris, you are just promoting otherwise, one of the guests says. You're agitating. The voters will listen to you and do exactly the opposite. Why? Because... And then Boris says, well, if you want to play with Europe, you have to make a decision. If you want to play hockey with Canadians and not the Indians, then... Anyways, you can see that this is something that you would not have seen last year or a few months ago, right? This would have been a huge no-no. And I can bet you that this guy probably will fall accidentally from a window very soon. Boris spoke out a little bit too harshly against Putin, so I'm expecting him to not reappear at the very minimum. If not, he's going to be somewhere at the very bottom of a 10-story building. It's very surprising, but I think there's more and more of these elites, these, journalists, propagandists that are becoming more pragmatic, more realistic. They see that they can't win this war. They took him over 10 months to grab Bakhmut with tremendous losses. And now, Russia's at a crossroad. They don't know what to do next, right? They just literally wouldn't be able to continue with their pushes, right? Bakhmut was it. So after Bakhmut, right, the Russians don't really know what else would be a victory for them, right? Holding on to the occupied territories, but the special military operation was meant to denazify the entirety of Ukraine, right? As long as Ukraine exists, it's always going to be a problem and a headache for the Russian people and the regime. So it's a huge issue, and you can see that more and more of these people are now realizing that we need to make a deal somehow because we want to be aligned with the West, right? These Russian people, these elites, not interested to spend their stolen money from the Russian people in Russia, right? Through the sanctions, they're not allowed to go in Europe and the United States and their kids to school, right? It's more difficult, at least now, to do so. But they want that life. They want that lavish Western life, that they can go to Italy, to France, buy properties in London, in New York, send their kids to the best universities, spend their winters in the Alps. Unfortunately, they can't do that anymore. So now you're starting to see as well that this attitude is becoming more and more prominent within the elites. So that's the video for today, guys. Let me know what you think about the Belarus situation. Do you think after the death of Lukashenko, it seems to be heading that direction, at least? If that happens, is there going to be civil war in Belarus? How you would see it happen? Be interested to hear your comments about it. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Please subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content. And take care, you guys. Thank you so much.